So Gary, I've obviously long time Yankee fan. Huge fan of Gary Sanchez. Sorry, Gary Sanchez. Gary Sheffield, I should say.
Oh my God.
That was a walkout of the Vista pre-pro. No, huge fan of Gary Sanchez. Gary Sheffield is one of my favorite players growing up. What was his memory? What was his memories of being a Yankee? Did he ever tell you about his favorite experiences in the locker room or games or whatever as a Yankee?
Honestly, the biggest thing, my biggest memory of like the Yankees and like something that me and my dad actually talk about a lot is the actual negotiation to get my dad in New York. And what people don't realize is that my uncle Dwight, so he's my great uncle, Dwight Gooden, and he was working with the Yankees at the time. Well, he told George Steinbrenner, look, Gary Sheffield's going to be signing with the Yankees. You need to offer him this amount of money, and he's going to say yes. And it was just going to be a clear negotiation. Well, George Steinbrenner didn't do agents. There was no Scott Boras walking into Yankee Stadium to do a negotiation. It was always the player walking in. You tell him your number that you want, and then he'll give you a counter, and usually you meet in the middle. And that's the way the Yankees did things. And my dad and George Steinbrenner were sitting in a room, and I was right there, and I'm looking at it, and it's literally just me, George, and my dad. And I'm like, wow, okay. And he goes, I want $13 million for $13 million a year for 3 years. And he goes, well, we're bringing in A-Rod, and I just don't know if that makes sense at that number, given your age. And he goes, well, if you don't want to give me that number at this age, then just go get Vladimir Guerrero. And so he was like, and it was funny because it was two egos. My dad has a huge ego, and George Steinbrenner obviously notoriously had a big ego, but they were good egos. They were egos that really challenged the room. I like to believe I have that ego as well, but he literally sat there, and my dad was not happy with the offer. It was somewhere around like $9 million a year. And so my dad basically just like storms out the room, and I'm just sitting there eating Smarties off of George Steinbrenner's desk. And I'm like, oh God. And obviously I don't really care. I'm 10. And George looks at me and goes, man, we got to get your dad in pinstripes. I said, well, why don't you just offer him what he's asking for, man? He's never failed anywhere he goes. He went to Atlanta, hit well. He went to like any of these teams. He played well in LA. They should have kept him. And I told him this, and he's like, no, I understand. He's like, you think you can go get your dad to come back to the room? I want to talk to him. And I said, honestly, the chances are he's not coming back. That's what I said to him. And he's like, you really believe that? He said, you really know your dad that well? There, you don't think he's going to come back in here? I said, probably not. Unless you go out, you have to go get him. And I said, I promise you, I'll go ask him. So I came out the room and I said, Dad, like, George wants to talk to you again. And he's like, I don't give a rat's ass what he's got to say. He's not like, I'm not coming off my number like that. And so I said, and so George walks out and said, Gary, come on, sit down. We'll get closer to your number. And my dad walks in. He goes, but he said 39 for 3 years and shook his hand. And that's when he became a Yankee. And so it was like,
that is incredible, man.
Yeah. So it was like the split moment where it was like, my dad and George Steinbrenner were like colliding, and George, like, ultimately he wanted to give the Yankees fans the best possible experience. He actually cared about this team to the point where he'll go a mile that he doesn't feel he even had to travel, but he will just to make sure. So some great memories there. My dad always talked about how old the stadium felt, but at the same time, like, there was beauty in that. Like for me, I went to Old Yankee Stadium a lot.
Me too.
And now, believe it or not, I've never been to New Yankee Stadium. I've never been there.
Really?
No, and I heard it's like a museum. And that's
it's like a shopping mall.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. And that's like the opposite of how I describe Old Yankee Stadium. Like, you would just hear people stomping their feet. That's how old the Old Yankee Stadium was. And so I just have great memories and just plenty of stories in the clubhouse. I'll tell you that.